this assay looks at prion-like forms of the misfolded proteins that are actually causing and spreading the disease throughout the brain. And we believe that there's data that all of the neurodegenerative diseases, whatever their initial cause, eventually form these prion-like particles. And the way that it spreads is cell to cell, or in some cases, like synuclein, the spread seems to be predominantly through the CSF. And once you have these particles in the CSF, that is actively spreading disease. Now, the issue is that most of these prion-like particles are intracellular. And we're not, a biomarker that requires a brain biopsy is not particularly welcome or useful. However, a very small amount leaks into the CSF, at least for synuclein, the actual particles causing the disease. But the number there is so low that traditional methods for molecular detection, so antibody detection with amplification of the signal, is still probably a millionfold too low to detect. And so we're talking about detecting 1 to 20 molecules in an assay. So to do that, what Amprion has done is to develop an amplification method. So we understand that the basis of these diseases and the way they spread intracellularly is that you get a misfolded form of a very abundant intracellular protein. It happens rarely. It is not a positive event, but when it happens, that aggregate, that misfolded aggregate, very rapidly catalyzes the misfolding of any normal form of the protein that crashes into the aggregate. And so over time, starting even with a single molecule in a cell, the cell can be filled with loads of these misfolded aggregates that can be seen under the microscope. And so in the case of neuronal synuclein disease, they're called Lewy bodies. Since we're going to talk about MSA, although we don't understand exactly the process, misfolded synuclein takes a slightly different molecular form, and it's found mainly in glial cells rather than in neuronal cells. And these glial inclusions, though, are still the same synuclein molecule, just folded and twisted a little bit differently. But in both cases, we have been able, using Amprion's technology, to amplify these. And we are surprised at how well the amplification assay mimics what's seen in the brain. So the context for this is we developed this. We believed it was going to be very important for Parkinson's disease and Lewy body dementia. So we really went after the Lewy body diseases. And somewhere between 2021 and 2023, with the Fox Foundation and PPMI, we completed several studies that showed that our tests correlated with what one saw at pathology for the few cases that had made it to 90 to 100%. I mean, it really matched the gold standard, but very early. So you didn't have to do it right before someone died. You seem to have the same result 10 years earlier when we have longitudinal samples. In 2023 and 2024, we said, wow, we have this very powerful tool. What if we apply it to Alzheimer's? Because at autopsy, 40 to 50% of Alzheimer's cases that are diagnosed as not Lewy body dementia are loaded with Lewy bodies in the neocortex. And sure enough, and we did this with NIH and with ADNI. I don't know if you know the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative. So they had patients for many years, and some of them had gone to autopsy. And sure enough, the correlation was off the chart. So we could actually predict very early in disease which Alzheimer's patients actually had Lewy body copathology. And then once we could determine that, other investigators were able to show, including the ADNI investigators, that if you had both Alzheimer's, so you have amyloid and tau, plus synuclein and Lewy bodies, the disease progresses up to 3 times faster. So it becomes a completely different disease. And probably the answer for synuclein is as important for a patient diagnosed as Alzheimer's in predicting their future and allowing them to adjust their lives to what's happening next. So that we really sealed what we'll call Parkinson's, Lewy body dementia, and Alzheimer's. But the big unanswered question for us has been MSA. As you alluded to, MSA is it's an insidious disease. It's very hard to diagnose early on. It looks almost exactly like early Parkinson's or early tauopathies like corticobasal disease or PSP. And so the difference, MSA is not as benign of a disease, and it doesn't respond to the same things that Parkinson's does. So it's really important early on. So MSA progresses quickly and actually is a disease that can be fatal in a significant number of cases. Whereas in general, we say people tend to die with Parkinson's rather than of Parkinson's. And so it is essential. And knowing that it's in different cells, the question that we have tried to ask is the molecular difference between the misfolded synuclein in MSA sufficient to distinguish in a very similar or maybe even the same assay as PD and Lewy body dementia? Could we look at all of these? And that's what this paper is about.